Hello, my name's Alan Pope. Welcome to this screencast. In this screencast, we're going to look at dual boot installing Ubuntu. That means running Windows and Ubuntu side by side on the same computer. We have a computer here that's got Windows already installed, and we want to install Ubuntu, but given the choice at boot time whether we want to run Windows or Ubuntu. So we're logging on now to the Windows desktop, and I've inserted an Ubuntu CD. The CD I've used is version 6.06 of Ubuntu, otherwise known as Dapper Drake. And we can see if we go to my computer, there's my Ubuntu CD. Now while we're here, if I right click and choose autoplay, or if I insert this CD whilst Windows is running, this application starts up, showing some Windows based open source applications that you can install directly from this CD. This is useful for people who maybe aren't ready to do the switch to Ubuntu yet, but want to have a look at what open source has to offer. There's a number of applications, including a web browser, email client, word processor, instant messenger, and graphical editor. These are all part of the OpenCD project. What we're going to do next is what it says at the top, boot from this CD to try out Ubuntu. So let's reboot the PC. You may need to set your PC to boot from CD, which might need to be done in the BIOS, or you might have a menu option when you turn your computer on. It might mean that you have to press a certain key, del or a certain function key, in order to make it boot off of the CD. And this is now booting off the Ubuntu CD that you just saw under Windows. You can see there's a progress bar moving across the screen slowly, and various pieces of text going up the screen telling you what it's doing. Now this is going to boot into a live environment that you could use on a desktop or laptop PC, but you'll also have the option of being able to install it onto your hard drive. Now bear in mind we've already got Windows on this hard drive, so we're going to have to partition the disk so that we can fit Ubuntu on there as well as Windows. Now this procedure doesn't always work 100% reliably, so it is worth saying that you should back up everything on your Windows partition as a matter of course before you attempt to repartition the disk and install Ubuntu. That's just a sensible precaution anyway. In addition to which, sometimes this procedure doesn't actually work for certain makes and models of PCs, certain chipsets of motherboard. And there's an alternative CD called the alternate CD that doesn't boot into a live environment but still allows you to install Ubuntu. And that's another option you can try, and we'll probably look at that in another screencast. Bear in mind it is slightly slow to boot up because it's running everything off of a CD, which is orders of magnitude slower than running off of a hard disk. So now we have the Ubuntu desktop running off the live CD, and we could use the various applications installed, or we could go and have a look at the disks as they are configured, and we'll use the GNOME partition editor, or gparted. This is gparted, the GNOME partition editor. Now you can see we have one disk in this machine, which is addressed as /dev/hda. There's one partition on there, which is an NTFS partition. That's my Windows partition. It's got plenty of unused space, so what we want to do is shrink that partition down. And you can see if I click on it, there is a resize and move option. So directly in gparted, I could resize that partition down to make room at the end for my Ubuntu installation. Now I'm not actually going to do that in gparted because the installation software has the ability to do that as well. So we're going to try that. But as I said, sometimes the partitioning tool can't work in certain situations, and that's why you need to know that gparted is there that allows you to repartition disks. So I've double clicked the install program on the desktop, and it's now asking me what language I want to run the installer in, and I'm going to run it in English. I click forward, and it now asks me where I am in the world. This is for setting up time zone and the time on my computer. I've said that I'm in London, which is the nearest city to where I am. And you can see here the current time is the same as the current time on my local machine. So that's right. I click forward. Now it's asking me what keyboard layout I have. And down here I can test out the keyboard layout, pressing special keys to make sure that they all appear correctly. Once you've chosen the correct keyboard layout, press forward. Now it's asking you for your name. There's no nefarious reason why it needs your name. It's just so that when you display things, they come up with your name correctly. And here's your username, which you can choose, and a password to secure your data and your machine. This first user will be an administrative account and will have quite a lot of access to control the machine. So we need to be careful with that password. And we give the computer a name. I'll call it Doofus. Now it's asking us which disk we want to install Ubuntu on. It goes off and scans to find out how many disks there are in the machine. And we get a number of options here. The first one is the one I'm going to choose, resize the first IDE disk. But there are other options. You could wipe the disk. Now I don't want to do that because I don't want to lose my Windows install. I want to have a dual boot installation. We can move this slider backwards and forwards to create the size of our new partition in which we'll install Ubuntu. When I click forward, it goes off to do some analysis, and it should do the repartitioning. Okay, so now we've got a summary of what it plans to do to our machine. You can see down the bottom here it's going to add 2 new partitions in addition to our existing Windows partition. Partition 2 on HDA, the first disk, is going to be of type ext3. That's the file system that it's going to use. And partition 5 on HDA is going to be swap. Swap on Linux is the equivalent of page file on Windows. So now the installer is running, and we can pretty much leave it alone. We can go off and use the applications that are installed here to have a play around with Ubuntu while it's installing. You can see now that it's creating the file system on the second partition of the first hard disk, and now it's getting onto the actual installation proper. This takes a little while, so let's go and have a look at the web while the installation is running. The length of the installation, the length of time it takes to install, is dependent upon a few factors, usually the speed of your computer, how much memory you've got, and the speed of your CD-ROM drive. Now if we open our web browser, and I take you to wiki.ubuntu.com, and in the top right we search for dual boot, you'll find the documentation that supports this screencast. In fact, this screencast was based on the content of some of this web page. And it's worth pointing this out because this web page has some useful information if the procedure that I've shown doesn't work. So for example, there are issues with XP and NTFS, and here it details what you can do if the partitioning doesn't work or the installer fails for some other reason to do with the partitioning of the disk. It also outlines down here that modern PCs generally don't come with a Windows CD. Windows image of a Windows CD is often on the hard disk and you have to burn it yourself. So it's a check that you need to make that you have a copy of the Windows CD should you need to reinstall it. Now let's skip forward in time slightly. Of course it will actually take a bit longer than this, but I can skip forward a little bit here. Nearly finished. Okay, we're right at the end now. Grub is the menu that gets installed, which is the first thing you'll see when you reboot the PC. So now the installation's finished, I can continue to use the live CD if I want to, and carry on using the applications just straight off the live CD, but now that I've installed Ubuntu, I probably want to reboot to the hard disk so that it's quicker and I can then customize the applications for my own use. So if I hit the power button in the top right hand corner and reboot the PC, first thing you see is it shut down nicely. And it'll ask you to remove the CD and press enter. And then when you turn your PC on, you need to make sure it reboots off the hard disk and not off of the CD. Of course, if you remove the CD, that's not a problem. So here's the Grub boot menu. There's a number of options here. There's two options at the top for Ubuntu. The first option is to boot normally into the graphical user interface. The second option is recovery mode, which, with some assistance, you can fix some problems that can occur. The third one does a memory test. Memory problems can cause a lot of issues in PCs these days, so that's why there's a test there. And the last option is the other operating system that's installed. If we choose the first option on the list and boot up, you can see now it's booting into Ubuntu. And again, we get the progress bar going across the screen and the messages going up the screen. We happen to use version 6.06, otherwise known as Dapper Drake, but you could install a newer version. Edgy Eft version 6.10 is also available, and it looks much the same. So this is the logon screen. Now if we log on to Ubuntu using the username and password that we created during the installation, we should get the Ubuntu desktop appear. You'll notice that it's significantly faster booting off of the hard drive than it was booting off the CD-ROM. There we go, we're straight into the desktop. There's our CD-ROM. And our applications we'll find under the applications menu, and there's loads of other good stuff up there which will be covered in other screencasts. That's it, we've got Ubuntu installed. Now let's just do the final check. We'll reboot the PC and make sure that we can still get into Windows. So if I choose Windows XP from the boot menu, from Grub, here we go, it boots into Windows, no problem. It's all looking good. Just do a final check by logging on. This all looks good. Okay, so in summary, we can install Ubuntu on a disk that already has Windows on it by resizing the partition that Windows is in, leaving about 10 gig free for Ubuntu to be installed, and the installer sets up Grub so that we can choose which operating system to boot to. Thanks very much for watching. My name's Alan Pope. You can contact me, alan@popey.com.